Welcome back to SMSF Mates Daily Podcast. This is our general advice warning that we are required to warn you that any advice has been prepared without taking into account your objectives, financial situations or needs, and because of that, you should, before acting on the advice, consider the appropriateness of the advice having regard to your own objectives, financial services and needs, and where the advice relates to the acquisition or possible acquisition of a financial product, you should obtain a product disclosure statement, PDS, relating to the product and consider the PDS before making any decision about whether to acquire the product. Now let's get into it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the key part with a self-managed super fund is those first two words. It's self-managed, right? So you've decided to walk away from advisors, whether they're industry or a managed fund scenario, and you've gone down that pathway. I suppose the accountant in me would say most investing you can do within an industry or a managed fund that they do have DIY options now. And it's probably only a relatively new thing in the last few years where you can buy ETFs and ASX shares through your fund direct, and that's cost effective, you know.
No one ever told that to 25-year-old me.
No, and that probably didn't exist maybe when Gareth took the leap into a self-funded super fund and self-managed, and for me personally, when a self-managed super fund for us invest in an unlisted shares and unlisted property, commercial property, so business property, which you can't do in your other super fund. So I like the idea that I'm a part owner in the building I'm paying rent into in my business, and you know you can't do that in any other vehicle, and be protected in retirement from a big capital gain and tax-free profits and rent effectively. So it made sense for us for that side of it, and I've got an interest to do the self-managed part of the fund. So it is more costly. It's a fair bit more regulations on what you can and can't do because you've stepped in as the advisor yourself. But you've got to be focused on that self-managed part. So in my view, if I didn't have any time or willingness to manage the investments, then that's probably when I'd be looking to go back into another type of fund and
I think you've got to back yourself, right? Like, you know, in my relationship, my wife doesn't have any interest in managing our money at all. So she backs me, so I've got to back both of us. And you know, it's my neck on the chopping block. I think a lot of people like to have someone to blame, and a financial advisor is an easy person to blame when your portfolio goes down 10%. Yeah. You know, you forgot all of the 10% annual gains you had for the last 10 years, and you come down on a ton of bricks because it went down 10% in a week. Whereas if you self-manage, you owned it. Yep. You were in your own race. You know, you made that decision. That's what you decided. You are, and certain people are like that. I am like that. I do my own thing.
No,
if you're not good at doing your own thing and you need someone else to tell you what to do.
Yeah, and that's the key part, right? If you're willing to do that, then that's the right mindset, I suppose, to have as a trustee, or if you're looking after the funds of the super fund. But it ultimately, for me, it comes back to I do like to know where my money is invested and what those shares are, opposed to knowing 30% is invested in Australian shares and what are those shares doing, what's their
exposure. And what are those shares?
Yeah,
like which ones are they? The bottom 50 or are they the top 50? You know,
and that's the side of it that I think most people, I would hope, with self-managed super funds are engaged in what they're investing in, and it's not just money in the bank or TDs, because you're better off actually doing that in a low-cost option than a self-managed super fund. But I think for most people, it's a great tool to invest in things you can't otherwise invest in. But you've also opened yourself up to the upside and the downside of what that is, and you've got to be accountable to yourself. You don't have anyone to blame for it, because you're the one that pulled the trigger to invest in XYZ, and I've definitely had my share of losses.
So did we answer the question? What was it? yeah.
Oh, what's the allocation? I think it was the allocation, right? So, there it's sort of we've sort of answered it, I think, Gareth. But the allocation will come back to what your risk profile is or what you need to achieve. It's a balance of that. So your risk profile might be very conservative. In my case, an accountant by nature, so it's fairly conservative. But what I need in retirement requires me to take a different risk appetite to get there. So my investments are probably, I would say, is probably about 70 to 80% growth and 20 to 30% defensive. So I try and manage that within our fund and in various ways. So whatever the investment is, whether it's property, unlisted shares, Australian shares, overseas shares, bonds, I balance it out using that.
And I think on that point as well, it's really important to work out when you need the cash, because of the liquidity of, if you're 80% property, 20% shares, selling a property transaction can take months, years, sometimes longer. And then all of a sudden you've got 80% of your fund dumped out into cash. And now what am I going to do with it? So you have to think about how quickly do you need to draw down the funds when you get there.
Yep. No, and that's why liquidity is a big point with some self-managed super funds potentially having big assets, like you say, and when they get to retirement, you got minimum pension withdrawals, which can affect that side of it. But you should be aware, or an advisor should be talked to when you're getting closer to those main points. And we've got clients that are self-managed super fund clients, and they'll still engage with an advisor at the main points in their life. So it could be when they have kids. So you're looking at your insurances, you're looking at your investment outlook now that you've got kids. It might be in marriage, if you're looking at it at that point. It could be at a divorce if that unfortunately happens to you. It could be when you're looking at transitioning to retirement, the kids are out of home, or it could be when you receive an inheritance, or it could be when you're getting closer to retirement. You still need an advisor. Self-managed doesn't mean there are no financial advisors you should engage, because those big moments generally require a statement of advice from a financial advisor to ensure that you are on the right path. Or there isn't.
And if I've got a self-managed super fund, I can still have an advisor.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a misconception that if you're an SMSFer, then you're on your own 100%. But there's plenty of accountants, tax lawyers, financial advisors who won't have any problem giving you their advice. So I think it's a misunderstood.
Yeah, well,
maybe I've misunderstood it. Ashwin's not in his head.
There wouldn't be a lot of accountants or tax advisors with their licenses, because it just got cost prohibitive. And personally, from my point of view, we ended up letting go of our license because what we had to charge to give people advice
because of liability insurance.
Yeah, so, and it serves its purpose. But there are financial advisors out there that will engage with self-managed super fund clients, so you can have that conversation on where you should have your asset allocation depending on, again, your budget, your runway, and retirement. So that's the accountant answer in me, is you do need to probably engage an advisor to get the right outcome of your allocation, but that's useful information, because that's what's going to guide you for the next period of time till that big event that happens potentially in the future. So that's the way I would approach it, and it's how I went with our super fund, was look at what we needed and map my way that way. So I don't know if Gareth actually did that. Did you ever see what your trajectory is? And
no, I'm a kick it down the road, punt it, it'll work itself out.
Free spirit.
I think it's a really interesting point, because when you embark on this little journey, people quote you numbers like 5% a year, 6% a year, 8% a year. Pick a number, and you can very quickly do a little spreadsheet and say, if I put 25 grand in a year, and I've got 100 grand to start with, then at 6% I'm gonna end up with $1 million, and if at 8% I'm gonna end up with $2 million, and so on. But then they throw in little things like global financial crisis and a COVID meltdown, and those numbers have just become irrelevant. I think it's important to have a sphere of knowledge, in that that it may be somewhere between 3 and 10%, maybe, but I don't think anyone has any ability to predict a 30-year compounded average interest rate for, like, people would like to, but if I could do that, I'd be a very, very wealthy person.
Yeah, we wouldn't be doing a podcast.
No. So I think you take each year as it comes. And I think the point Ashwin's probably trying to get to is keep on top of it. Like, you may start off when you're 30 and say, well, by the time I'm 60, I want $2 million in my super fund. But you need to be on top of it every year. If we did 10 years of zero, either your expectations have to change, or you may have to take more risks or less risks, or put more money in, or you need to.
Part of it would be rebalancing, right? So, and a lot of people don't do that in their fund, whether it's in the self-managed spectre. I'd assume, like, you'd look at your fund, and if you had a really big win in one of your barrels that you got your money in, and it's overperformed, you're supposed to realise that gain and then reinvest it in the pool. And if you're not doing that, that's okay, but as long as you're still aware that you're not doing it, so you've made the active decision not to do it, that's okay. But I would probably rebalance if I do have a really big upside in, let's say, Australian equity. So the Australian shares have really done well. I'm going to cash some of that in and rebalance it.
Find the next opportunity.
Yeah. And you just got to spend your time doing that, I think. But if you choose not to do it, that's okay as well. But be aware that you chose not to do it.
It's a bit like playing lots of little games in one big game. It's not one game that you're going to be the winner in 30 years. It's,
Yeah, no, that's true.
Thank you for joining us once again. If you're interested in our waffle about self-managed super funds, feel free to join us on smsfmate.com.au or search SMSF Mate in Spotify.